Hey everybody, welcome to the SNL Stats panel, season 46, episode 3. My name is John, and I'm so happy that you guys have come back and checked it out. Hopefully we didn't get too crazy last week with our panel, but I think it was a lot of fun. If you haven't seen it yet, check it out. We had Andy Hoagland from SNL in Review, Dave Buckman, who's awesome, and That Week in SNL's Andrew Dick joined us last week, and we had a really fun conversation about the Bill Burr episode, the tone of the show, and where it's going. So that is available if you search SNL Stats on YouTube. Make sure to subscribe so you don't miss any episode. Or on any podcatcher you have, search SNL Stats, and you can get the audio from our panels. But we're ready to turn the page and talk about this week's show with host Issa Rae and musical guest Justin Bieber, who's back again. So I'm really excited to bring in our panel. And first, back by popular demand, you guys asked for her. She was great when she joined us for the Chris Rock panel. Let me introduce Liz Shannon Miller. She is the senior TV editor for Collider. Liz, how are you doing?
Great. Looking forward to disappointing everyone who asked me back.
No disappointments here. We're thrilled to have you. Next up is the SNL recapper, who I believe told me before the show he's been doing this since season 38 or season 39. So he's a real vet when it comes to talking about SNL. He writes for the AV Club. Dennis Perkins, how you doing?
Hi, everybody. I'm fine. Thank you.
Welcome to the show, Dennis. We're happy to have you.
Thank you. I'm very nervous.
Okay, well, nothing to be nervous about. Just, I'm excited to hear your thoughts on the show. Obviously, we get to hear you write about the show or we get to read your writing every single week. And now we get to see you and hear from you.
Yeah,
Can I ask a question?
Of course.
Dennis, do you remember what your first episode was that you ever?
We were just looking it up. Oh my God. I should have been so much more better prepared.
No.
I'll find it right now. Oh, okay. I took over midway through season 39 or later in the season, and my very first one was Jim Parsons and Beck.
Oh, wow. Okay. Yeah,
I gave it a D.
That sounds about right.
So I don't know if you do letter grades anymore, but
we do. Yeah.
Okay, so we're going to get into it. We're going to talk about it all. But before we get into that, I want to introduce the last panelist we have here. And let me introduce Sammy Kay. Sammy is somebody who I interviewed as part of my call for superfans to come on the show. And this guy messaged me right away. He said, "You have to have me on the show. My bar mitzvah theme was Sammy Night Live." And
True.
So, I mean, as somebody who works in event production, I knew that this was, somebody I could connect with and have on the show. So Sammy, how you doing?
I'm doing really well. Yeah, as John said, I'm a huge fan of the show. Also a big fan of my other panelists who I've been reading their reviews of the show and other things online for many years. So I'm happy to be here. But yeah, my SNL history, I think the first episode I watched was Zach Braff and Maroon 5. It was the season finale of season 32. And I don't know why I watched that for my first one, but I think I was a fan of Scrubs at the time when I was in, I think, 6th grade. And I'm like, the show has Zach Braff on it. I like Zach Braff. And then I kind of fell down the SNL rabbit hole. So here I am on the podcast 12 years later talking about it. So.
Yeah. And obviously, even though you started in season 32, you've gone back and checked out SNL throughout the decades. So, you know your stuff, and we're excited to hear from you. Dennis, I didn't even get a chance. I'm sorry about that. I didn't even get a chance to ask you what your history with the show is. Like, how did you fall in love with SNL, and what was SNL meant to you over your life?
You can probably tell from my beard, I'm pretty old. I'm 5 years older than the show, and it was the 70s. So my parents apparently used to let me watch it live when I was very young. I remember I was blown away by it, as a little kid. There was something about it that really hooked me. I remember the story I remember, the very first sketch I remember being embarrassed by was at a cocktail party my parents were throwing, and their friends were, SNL was on in the background, and it was the 70s. So I was up and I was 6 or whatever. And, these friends of my parents asked what I was watching, and I told them, and I said, it's great. And then there was a sketch with Garrett Morris and Yvonne Hudson, who was a very little remembered, very, very early cast member, Black woman who was on the show very, very briefly, and it's a talk show spoof called Bad Clams. And it was about them eating a bucket of spoiled clams with Lucille Ball, played by Gilda. and my parents' friends being very, very aghast, and me saying, no, it's usually better than that. And that's pretty much been my to this day, that's pretty much how I explain my love of Saturday Night Live.
Yeah, it's usually better than that is the byline for a lot of SNL episodes that we see. But we're all here because we love the show, and we, different generations can connect with the show in a different way. So I think that's exciting, especially, Sammy being someone who's younger and has gone back and seen the show probably has a little bit of a different perspective on someone who grew up with the show. So it's really cool to connect on this level and talk about the show. So I can't wait to get into the season so far and talk about what we've seen. Liz, let me bring you in. And we heard your thoughts on Chris Rock and the premiere, but it's been a couple weeks since we've heard from you. So tell me, has your opinion changed about the season in seeing the last 2 episodes? And what are your thoughts so far?
I mean, I'm kind of in this place right now where, some of it's, it's SNL is always like, you watch an episode and you're like, ah, God, there was like 2 or 3 good sketches in there, maybe. And then, who knows how you'll feel a month from now? Like, it could be the best or the worst thing you've ever, you'll look back on it with a completely different perspective, because it's such a flash in the pan moment every time. And then it's really interesting to look back and see what episodes have, sustained or maintained their level of quality, like beyond just the moment. I feel like when we initially did our talk, I hadn't read this yet because I don't think it had been published yet, but Seth Simons, who's kind of an independent comedy journalist, did a pretty in-depth look at, he basically managed to get a lot of people talking about the actual precautions they're putting into the live shows in studio. And his ultimate conclusion was it's not like that great. Like, it's, as much as they're saying we're doing everything we can, like, the basic fact of the matter is putting over 100 people in a studio to make a live comedy show is not the smartest thing that people could be doing in the era of COVID. So that kind of weighed on my mind watching the last 2 episodes, just because I worry about people. I don't want anyone to get sick. I want everyone to stay healthy. And there have been some great sketches, like Kate McKinnon doing it in Weekend Update last weekend was fantastic. I liked, there are a couple of things that I really liked from the Issa Rae episode, but it's a daunting thing. And I think that, it's hard. It's one of those things where I don't want to be a downer and bring up the pandemic, but at the same time, like, there's a pandemic. Like,
yeah.
It's kind of hard to pretend there isn't a pandemic right now.
Well, I'm curious if we can elaborate on that for a second. Do you feel that from what you've read or heard about the COVID's impact on the show, do you feel that it's affected the overall quality of the season?
Well, it's interesting. Like, I don't want to skip ahead in the order or anything, but I was watching the. I hadn't actually realized there was a Cut for Time sketch until this afternoon when you sent out the agenda. So I watched the Cut for Time sketch, and Cut for Time is such a wonderfully generous phrase. It's like, it's cut for time. And we just didn't have time to put this on the air. It's not because maybe the sketch was bad and it died in rehearsal. And you can tell that sketch is dying in rehearsal, but even as it's dying in rehearsal, like, the laughter that it does get is so, like, it feels like, I'm wondering if, like, a sketch dying in rehearsal during COVID is like a sketch dying in rehearsal during pre-COVID, I guess. I don't know. That's not really an answer to your question. I think it's
No, it's okay. What actually, like, I've noticed by having you on the show on the Chris Rock one, and now with the Issa Rae one, is that you don't have to answer my question directly. I'm actually interested in what you have to say, and we're going to get into it. We're going to dive in further. So we're going to flesh out all those thoughts throughout the next hour.
That's good news.
But Dennis, let me bring you in. I knew I was having you on the show tonight, so obviously, I encourage everybody to check out your article on a week-to-week basis, and I wanted to make sure that I read your recap thoroughly. And I noticed that one of the words that you used to describe the Issa Rae episode is forgettable. And I was curious if that is something that you would feel about the entire season, or is that something that's simply applied to your opinion of the show on Saturday?
I mean, it's only 3 episodes. The Bill Burr one had more energy to it and more sketches that really jumped out at me as something that I would go back to at some point. Forgettable's tough. I like what Liz was saying. It's really hard. You don't want to grade the show on a curve at this point. But technically it has been rough. A lot of the line readings have been, and the directing moves have been off and flat. And you're just like, that they're doing a show at all is it might be ill-advisable, but it's certainly, the degree of difficulty is a lot higher. And so you don't want to grade it on a curve. I will say it hasn't been a very promising start for me. I don't think. I mean, they're good. We'll talk about it, but there are promising signs. But I haven't. I don't know. I'm not terribly excited so far.
Sorry, Liz. I was just going to say, because and I'll have you follow up in a second. But Dennis, that's totally okay. Like it's okay to be, if your opinion is forgettable. But I've noticed from having all these panelists on the last few weeks is that there's just a variety of opinions about the season so far.
Oh yeah,
to the point where I would actually, the word that I would use to describe the season so far the most is interesting. It's been an interesting start to the season. And my hope is that hopefully by the end of the show, we can change your mind a little bit about it, because I think there's a lot of things that are actually fascinating about what they've done so far in season 46. So I'm really sorry, Liz. Go ahead.
Well, I just kind of have a general question for the panel, which is, and maybe I hopefully I'm not stepping on something they're saying, but one of the weirdest things about the beginning of this season is the fact that they, Chris Rock, of course, knows his way around the studio. He knows what he's doing. But then they follow up with not one, but two, but now 3 first-time hosts. Like, that's, and part of it is, I'm always excited for them to bring in new blood. I'm very excited for Adele's episode. I think Adele's a very funny person. And I think, fingers crossed, that gets, transported well into the framework of the show. But it's just, is it because they can't get anyone else, or is it because, it's a baffling decision to me for some reason. Like, even just like a second timer, one person who's done it at least once before.
Yeah, there are a lot of theories that I've spoken to different people about. I mean, obviously, I don't know the answer, but what I can theorize is that it's possible. This was the first time in a very long time that I can remember an SNL episode where, going into the show, we didn't know who the host was going to be the following week. Right. And I would like to address that again later on in the podcast when we get to that. But at least what I'll say for now is I think that, based on my conversations with people, they really wanted to see how these first 3 weeks were going to go and then kind of decide what they were going to do from there, if that's possible. So there's always the chance that they didn't actually officially have Adele booked and they were waiting to see. I believe that, we have some friends from other podcasts who had mentioned that they were at the show and knew at the time who the host was going to be, but NBC wasn't ready to announce it yet. And I don't know that if these 3 shows were absolute disasters because of the protocols and whatever else was involved, that they wouldn't have just gone to former cast members from now on. So I think there's a lot of factors.
Really quickly, have they announced who the musical guest is?
It's her.
Okay, great.
Yeah. So let me bring in Sammy. So Sammy, tell me, superfan Sammy, tell me what you think about the season so far. How does this compare to the others that you've seen?
Yeah. Well, I do want to just quickly jump onto your guys' conversation about the host choices for this season, because I do think it is interesting that, you have Alec Baldwin in the studio, you have Jim Carrey in the studio, you have Maya Rudolph. Even this week, you have Chance the Rapper in the studio, all people who have hosted in the past and who have done like pretty great episodes. Obviously, Alec Baldwin is a legend at SNL, so it is interesting that in these first 3 episodes, not any of them kind of stepped up to host the show. I mean, you got to think that they were asked, or there's conversation about it. They're already there, and they're kind of worried about, with COVID, wanting to bring people in and out. And I mean, we already saw with 2 weeks ago that a musical guest had to be thrown, or not thrown off the show, but wasn't allowed to perform on the show that week because of certain COVID protocols. So it is something that is interesting, and kind of going off of what you were saying, John, about the whole Adele announcement. Like that was, something where I was like, every commercial break, I was like, okay, so is it before the first musical guest where they announce it, or is it before update? Like I always forget. And then they just announced it on a Sunday. It's definitely strange, but yeah, going into my thoughts for the season, I mean, Bill Burr's episode was something that I really enjoyed. I thought, the thing about his episode was his involvement in the show. It really felt like his stamp of comedy was all over that episode. And I think when you're, the best, SNL episodes, whether it's a comedian or not, I feel like you watch their episode and the sketches that the hosts are in, you feel like, not many other choices that they could have brought in could necessarily do that unless, there are some times with episodes where kind of the Issa Rae episode, I felt this way where you kind of do have a host that in certain sketches, you don't necessarily have their brand of comedy on it. But that's, with Bill Burr, it was all over the episode. But we kind of touched on the COVID stuff when Liz was speaking. But my thing with going into the season was I was a pretty big fan of the at-home episodes. I thought a lot of the cast members were able to kind of step up and shine. Chloe Feynman being one of them was someone who I think really excelled in that format. And all summer, her Instagram was like my SNL. Like every couple of days, she would have a story on her Instagram where she was doing Carol Baskin from Tiger King or whatever. So it was really cool to see her step up, and I think that's really translated into the season. She's a lot more prominent, which I think is great for someone who's only in their second year of the show, is able to, really step up as we have this big cast who, a lot of us kind of thought, Adie, Cecily, Kate McKinnon in a regular season, this would they probably would have left at the end of last season. I mean, I know there are rumors of a lot of these people who are, 7-8 years into the cast, who, if COVID didn't hit, they probably, wouldn't be on the show right now. So there's a lot of factors into answering your question. I feel like I'm a little all over the place here, but
no, this is great. I mean, I want to answer what you were asking, which is like, to put a button on it. I think that if the two episodes that we just had with Bill Burr and Issa Rae were disasters, or there was just specific logistical issues with doing the episodes, I think you would have a Jim Carrey host the next episode.
Right.
I think that they were comfortable with the process, at least, or are starting to get more comfortable with it. And that's why they're comfortable bringing in someone like Adele, especially someone who hasn't been on television in a few years, or hasn't done like a lot of live sketch comedy. We'll get into that. So that's to answer that question. And like I said, I think that as a panel, from what I'm seeing in the first 20 minutes of the show, is that we have a lot of thoughts in general about the season. And I think that the best way to tackle them is let's get into a little bit more about the Issa Rae episode, because I think that, some of the things that we're seeing, some of the good things, some of the bad things popped up in this episode. So overall, I would say this was a middle of the road SNL, but there were, like I said, interesting things happened. So Liz, I'll bring you back in. Let's talk a little bit about Issa Rae's episode specifically. What did you love? What didn't you love in the Issa Rae episode?
Sorry, I'm trying to get all the good things and the bad things that made.
So so just start with something, and we'll go off from there. Yeah.
No, I'm sorry. I think every time you have especially when you have a first time host, my concern, especially when it's someone, say, like a woman of color who maybe doesn't fit necessarily as well into the show's decades of framework, I worry about how well the show is going to serve her. And I think this episode did a nice job of really letting her comedic voice come out. I think she did. I thought her monologue was solid, not too long, touched on all the right things. I thought she had some really funny bits across the episode, both as a supporting player and as a lead player. And she felt well served by the episode, at least better served than she might have been, and better served than I remember seeing other. Like, I feel like Awkwafina got it in her first episode. Like, we've seen Jumanji: The Next Level. We've seen a Awkwafina be incredibly funny and incredibly talented across a number of different realms of comedy and drama. And I felt like her episode was a real disappointment just because they didn't really let her do anything. And Issa Rae, I thought, got the chance to do stuff. And basically, when you're hosting SNL, that's all you can hope for, especially in an era where there are 20, cast members.
Yeah, and as far as the actual format of the show, one of the things that I spoke with the panel last week about was that we were starting with these 13, 14-minute cold opens. And basically the show, if you go through the cold open and the monologue and a commercial, wasn't starting until maybe, almost 12 o'clock. And I felt like that was really affecting the overall quality of the show, even though Bill Burr put his stamp down on the episode and really made an impact. I was concerned about this trend that we're having during debate season. But Dennis, I was watching this past week and I was pleasantly surprised with the amount of content we got in this episode. I mean, I sent you guys notes and I have more sketches for this episode than I did for, the previous ones. And just with regards to pre-tapes that may have been held over or sketches, I just felt like the overall timing of the show was so much more SNL than it usually was the last couple of weeks. So what do you think about that?
Yeah, my big complaint is that they keep plugging a commercial parody in for the 10-to-1 sketch, or the very last sketch, which I think is a lousy idea. But yeah, it's usually a timing issue, I think, when that happens. But these shows have been maybe I'm still shell-shocked from reviewing the 3 at-home episodes that ended last season, just because of the sheer amount of quick hit, short films. Writing them was just like, oh God, I have 10 more to go through. Whereas these are seeming very breezy, and I think breezy in a sense that it's they feel short. They feel shorter than usual.
I think the whole the number of sketches, especially the number of live sketches versus pre-tape sketches.
Yes.
I mean, you're John. You're the stats man. You can tell us,
Yeah, I mean, if I looked at the last couple of weeks, I mean, after Weekend Update, we basically had 1 sketch and 1 pre-tape, but I mean, now we had, I think we had 2 sketches and 2 pre-tapes, which was definitely an improvement. And then we also got a cut sketch online, which you mentioned, Liz, which is, an improvement on that. I mean, despite the quality of it, it's still good to see more content.
I was just saying more live versus pre-tape, it feels like.
Yeah. Yes, I believe we did. I think we may have had 1 extra live sketch this week compared to the last couple of weeks. But you know what? The great thing was we had all 20 cast members appear in the show, which I was, worried about over the last couple of weeks, and it was nice to see.
I was actually going to say that, John, is even if it was 80 doing her 80 in America bit on Weekend Update, or Cecily having a voiceover, they actually managed to have all 20 cast members on this episode. Which again, going back to the beginning of the season when no one left and they added 3 featured players, I was like, how are they going to do this? And those are things that I did have issues with in the first 2 episodes where, I'm waiting on, where's Chris Redd? And it might have been in the Bill Burr episode. I don't think Chris Redd was in it. And a couple other cast members. For me, Melissa Villaseñor this season, she's been, nowhere. And that's been really frustrating for me because I'm a big fan of hers. And I feel like it was almost a meta moment in the cold open on Saturday where, she's talking to Trump. She has 1 line and Trump kind of dismisses her question, and then she's not seen for the rest of the episode except for a voiceover. So, but overall, and I think that's another reason why the cold open for me in this episode worked a lot better than the first 2, is because the town hall format plus the switching between the Biden and Trump town halls, involve so many other cast members to where, the Biden and Trump characters are kind of like the eccentric, look at these, crazy people trying to lead the country. And then the real people, the other cast members kind of bouncing off of them. I think that was really effective for me.
Yeah.
I feel like there's a point to be made about how there's a difference between a cast member only appearing once on screen because they're in Oregon shooting their Hulu TV show, and Melissa only getting 1 line in 1 sketch.
Totally.
Yeah, no, it's still not great. I mean, I think one of the things we spoke about in the Chris Rock panel, Liz, was it's too many cast members in general, but I know I don't want to spend every episode that you guys or our listeners are listening, always saying that. But I would like to say, really for me, Sammy, I totally agree with you. This was the best cold open of the season, by far. As far as I'm concerned, I think that, it had a lot of energy. It was exciting. And it was just, it could have been the format. You're totally right. It could have been the fact that we were bouncing back and forth between channels, which I'm sure is probably what a lot of people were doing. I mean, most people would say that they were watching ABC, but I'm sure that they were bouncing back and forth. And I think that, when you're bouncing back and forth on Thursday to watch the different things, it's like, okay, this is fast pace. And that is vintage SNL, is a fast-paced cold open that's quick, and then we start the show and it's high energy, and that's what I loved. So Dennis is like a historian of the show. Did you feel the same way? Because that's what I was watching this, and SNL was always supposed to feel like a party. I've heard our friend Rich Tackenberg say that before, is SNL is a party that we're all supposed to be invited to, and it actually felt like a party for a little bit at the beginning of the show.
I agree with Sammy that I like the energy of having so many moving parts to it and so many people having lines and different jokes coming from, literally different parts of the screen, with the audiences and the two different audiences and the two candidates and the two moderators. I enjoyed that. So John, I guess I would agree that it was the best cold open of the season. I still hate these. I think they're terrible.
Still grading on a curve, basically.
Okay, so Dennis, I'm gonna put you on the spot just for a second. Give me something that you like. I've asked some panelists this in the past. Mm-hmm. If you could, make one recommendation for the show to how to fix these, what would you do? Like, do you have a Band-Aid solution that you would think would, improve the tone of the start of the show?
Oh boy. As a reviewer, I think I'm always worried about sounding like a frustrated SNL writer, which is, of course, growing up, that's all I wanted to be. And not trying to rewrite the show and just try to evaluate what's there. I think that SNL, especially with Trump, but going back, for quite a while, they're seeking recognition, applause, and recognition laughter from hot button events from that week, and having Alec Baldwin or whoever the guest stars are that week say barely disguised versions of those things and get the laugh and move on. It'll show up in clips on the Sunday morning shows. It'll show up on YouTube. People will retweet it and make jokes about it. And it just seems terribly shallow to me. So I don't know. I think the show has done much, much better dealing with Trump when they leave Trump out of it, when it's Trump adjacent. I think back to, I think it was the John Cena episode where it was sort of a vision of Trump's day from his point of view, and seeing just somebody's impression of what they think is going on inside his head. And Baldwin was there, but I think you saw him in a mirror at one point. Oh no, he saw himself as John Cena in a mirror. That's right. And things like that, or the complicit ad with Ivanka, and things like that. Those seem to have more of more originality and more ideas behind them. These cold opens are not doing it for me. I'm sorry to say.
Okay. And that's fine, but I'm still going to press you on it. Do you have a recommendation that you would make to the show to maybe because I will just elaborate on what you said for a second, which is that I think 4 years ago, season 42, they, hit gold with Trump and Baldwin, and they, the ratings were huge and the headlines were big and everything was great. And then we did see actually some creativity from the show, like you mentioned in the John Cena episode, for example, where they were able to use the Trump character on SNL in a more creative way than him just simply standing at the podium talking. And it does feel that over the last couple of years, they've reverted back to Trump potentially just making a speech or something that isn't as different, or SNL's spin on things in a more creative way.
It seems kind of perfunctory. It's like, oh, it's the cold open. You know what you're going to get. I mean, if Alec Baldwin feels like doing the show that week, then they'll have Trump. Otherwise, they'll have something another figure. What they could do differently, I really think that they won't do anything different. Lorne loves the heat. Lorne's a heat seeker, and this is heat. Trump hates them. Trump tweets, well, he hasn't tweeted for a while about them, but he used to, that was guaranteed publicity. It was guaranteed heat, and it was guaranteed people loved it. It's guaranteed kind of fan service, and I don't know. Baldwin doesn't want to do Trump anymore. I don't want him to do Trump anymore. I think that there are other things that could be done, but they're not going to do them because they won't be as guaranteed. They won't get as many guaranteed views. So I don't know.
So let me ask the panel, and feel free anybody to jump in here. I mean, if the election goes, towards Biden, and then we don't have the Trump character, I'm sure that, he would still appear obviously up until January, and then potentially, pop in the future. But let's just say that we move towards a Biden SNL where it's a Jim Carrey SNL. How can we not make the same mistakes that have been made over the last 4 years with Alec being, kind of redundant in a way? How can we do things that are more creative with Carrey that is, more exciting for people? I guess, Sammy, do you have anything for that?
Yeah, that's tough because it's kind of hard to, once the switch has been flipped to the way that SNL is doing the political stuff these days, it's kind of hard for them to put their hand back on the lever and kind of switch it back to how things used to be. I mean, I know I was just watching on Peacock on the SNL channel that they have, which is great, by the way, an episode from like 2004 where like Amy Poehler and Tina Fey were playing the Bush sisters and just like talking in gibberish, and like, Will Forte's Bush like can't understand, but then Daryl Hammond's Cheney comes in and like he totally understands what they're saying. Like that is like something that is creative, and you're not just, taking something that happens on the news or is said in an interview on Twitter and, kind of like what Dennis was saying, just changing the verbiage a little bit and basically doing a live reenactment on TV. I think that is kind of where it stems. If you take the Biden character played by Jim Carrey and put him in these different situations that, aren't necessarily just word for word what he's saying on TV that day, I think, there's replay value. I mean, for me, like, I was a little kid when that episode with Poehler and Tina Fey aired, and, they weren't making too many references to what exactly was going on. And I was still able to kind of get the jokes. I feel like 10 years from now, people are looking back on these sketches with Biden and Trump. You're not going to know that some of the absurd things that were said were things that were actually said by these people. You're going to think it's a joke. So maybe it does work and it is future proof in that way. But that's what I would say is just kind of, taking the character and putting him in these different situations that isn't necessarily, reenacting what's going on in the news cycle.
Yeah. Liz, what do you think about that?
I mean, I think I want to go back to something. Basically, Dennis, I think in your answer about what could SNL do to fix the cold opens, you had your answer, which is don't use Trump. Like, don't put him on camera. Like, give Alec Baldwin the night off. And I think, like, and so honestly, if not to talk, let's say hypothetically, Trump does not win a re-election. And then they do have SNL does then make that transition. Like, I think the best thing that could happen for the show is Jim Carrey saying, "See you later, suckers," and 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 then and not only if you have to if you need a Biden, we saw last season there are literally like a dozen white guys who can do it, but more importantly, like think outside of just putting an impersonator on screen saying things that vaguely resemble what he said earlier in the week. I love what you said, Sammy, about the timelessness aspect of it, because like there's that whole bit in the cold open where they're doing the Mr. Rogers riff, which is very clearly a reference to a tweet that one woman sent this week about how, I can't believe that town hall felt like Mr. Rogers' neighborhood. And aside from the entire Twitter stream dunking on her for saying that it's bad to be like Mr. Rogers, like that's out of context. That moment's not going to make any sense in 5 years because hopefully we're not remembering what people tweeted about a town hall debate in the year 2020.
Well,
Hopefully,
that's what the Fly bit from last week's going to be too. Like people are going to see. Well, first off, the movie The Fly is 30, 40 years old at this point. I recognize it because I love Jeff Goldblum and I'm a big movie fan. But my friend who's my same age, won't necessarily get the reference. Looking forward, they're not going to understand why is he vomiting this white bile as Biden on Pence's head,
But what I will say is, that's what we do here specifically on SNL Stats is kind of compare things to previous eras of the show. And for me, at least, when I went back and I watched previous, debates from over the years, whether it was like H.W. Bush or like the Reagan stuff, or even back when they did the Nixon stuff in the 70s, I kind of learned about a lot of this stuff through SNL, and that's a lot of, that's what I think a lot of people who are probably going on Peacock right now and watching old episodes, are getting from that. And I don't think it's so crazy to think that people are going to be watching, younger generations are going to be watching the 2020 stuff, whether it's 10 or 15 or 20 years down the road, and kind of learning about what was happening in the news then. And I'm sure people do a lot of Googling when they, watch old episodes of SNL to try and understand those references.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think you're wrong about that at all. And I think there will be a lot of stuff that holds up, even just within the sets of context. Like, I think one, I point out that Mr. Rogers' bit as a detriment to the cold open, but they did follow it up they built on it with the Bob Ross thing. Like, they didn't just throw that up on the screen because it was a thing that happened this week. They did actually build upon it and make it a little bit funnier than it was in actual context, which is exactly the thing they should be doing with these cold opens.
Maybe the hook with this Biden Kerry impersonation is every week he's going to pick a different movie or TV pop culture thing and just do Kerry as Biden doing X pop culture thing. I don't know. We'll see what's next week.
That would be a weird hook.
Curse us for that. I'm gonna find out where you live, buddy.
Yeah, exactly. And I don't know if anybody else felt the same way, but I cannot watch a Mr. Rogers parody on SNL without thinking about Eddie Murphy. So it's like to me, it's like especially after he hosted last year, it's like a weird almost like dysphoria to watch a Mr. Rogers parody on SNL. But Dennis, I wanted to ask you because I'm curious in hearing your thoughts about the show and everything. What is your favorite era of the show? Is there like a specific point that you would say, that's my cast, or that's, my favorite? I would watch an episode from this era of the show anytime.
Yeah, I mean the original cast is the original cast, and it was so formative in, it was just formative across the board for me personally in my sense of comedy, and for American comedy and American TV comedy, but I think the Jan Hooks, Kevin Nealon, that era, Lovitz, and there's something in there that was just so, everybody was just hitting, everybody was money. And it just, I guess I was a little more sophisticated viewer by that point. And I kind of was getting more into the idea of comedy and why people popped and why they didn't, and what sketch comedy writing was about. And looking back, there's just so much great stuff in there.
Yeah, exactly. And I think like long time watchers of SNL see new cast members and then they start thinking, who is this cast member in the mold of previously? Like they'll see a Kate McKinnon and they'll think, okay, is this the new Kristen Wiig? They may see a Lauren Holt and think, is this the new A.D. Bryant? Like they may place people, I'm sure that they cast, similar archetypes over the years. So I'm curious for you, I mean, is there anyone in, the last like 10 or 15 years that has like really popped out on the screen to you in a way that, your favorite cast has, because, my ultimate goal in asking you these questions is to try and figure out, because that's what I want to see, because you're saying you don't want to be the grumpy SNL recapper, and I want to find what it is you particularly love about the show and that we can apply to today's show at least.
Yeah, I mean, I any SNL, I don't want to speak for you guys, but most SNL people make their all-time casts, and in the last 10 years, it's Bill Hader. You put him in any era, any cast, any mix, he could do it all. Everything he did, even when it failed spectacularly, I was always riveted. It's Hader.
Okay. And is that because he was willing to like push the envelope on certain things and maybe go beyond what you would normally see on the show?
I don't think so. I mean, He did occasionally. I just think that some people just have it, and some people are just funny. I see him do, voiceover parts. I was just watching a Bob's Burgers the other day where he was doing a role, and or just when the 30 Rock live show where he was just playing an airline pilot, a co-pilot next to Matt Damon, and he just had like 2 lines, and they were both the funniest lines in the show. And I was just like, this guy, I'll follow him anywhere.
You know, I've always loved you.
Copy that.
Yeah, I mean, and I totally get that. And for me, like Will Forte was that person for me on the show. And then, I felt like they casted Mike O'Brien in a similar manner to try and get that thing. And I don't know that they found that like super weird guy that, produces his own stuff late at night. So I get what it's like to have, fall in love with certain cast members and then hope that, the legacy of those cast members continue onto the show. My hope is that in these 20 cast members that we have right now, there is some gold here that, can be a little nostalgic for people, especially with some of the new guys, because I have been impressed how much, especially in this last episode, they've been involved with the show. So let's turn the page and let's kind of talk about the cast a little bit and what we've seen over the last 3 episodes. Sammy, I'll start with you. Has anybody really stood out to you in the last 3 episodes that you would say maybe like your MVP for so far, the first 3 episodes?
Yeah, I mean, I have been a fan of this person ever since she joined the show. I think she's been absolutely killing it. Heidi Gardner, just put her on the Weekend Update desk, and she can do absolutely anything. Her Bailey of the Movies character, the wife of the boxer character is amazing. And this past week, I mean, that got like dark. Like towards the end there, like the second time she, picks up her little mirror makeup thing, and inhales. It was just, she commits so much to the character, and just like she could, like, I can see her winning an Oscar one day. That's how much she like just gives it her all. That might be a ridiculous thing to say. We'll play back this episode in a couple of years and we'll see who got it right. But yeah, I think even in like the little bit, like you'll give her one line, like in the 5-hour empathy sketch, when she said like, it was like, well, I'm a woman. It's the same. Like, it was just like, her delivery just kills me. So, and she's someone who, I don't know if I would necessarily call her like this era's Kristen Wiig per se. She honestly, in a way, kind of reminds me a little more of Amy Poehler. I don't know why that is and what the exact difference is there, but I mean, she's someone that if she wasn't so good on the update desk in a character role, I can see her like being great as a Weekend Update anchor as well. I don't know how much kind of stand-up experience she has, but I think you give her anything and she's hilarious. And that she's really popped for me in these last 3 episodes.
Yeah. Liz, what do you think about that? Because, I love Heidi. I think she's amazing. Sometimes I think she's too good because she's just, like she's almost like a method actor where she's so into her role that I'm like, I wonder if somebody like shakes her when she walks off the sketch and is like, okay, snap out of it. But I love Heidi. And do you feel the same way? And is there anyone else who stood out to you?
I think Heidi's great. I think the moment in this episode that really confirmed for me just how good she is the slight, she drops character ever so slightly at the very end of her Weekend Update bit to make the joke about this is directed by David O. Russell.
I love that.
It's the slightest drop of character, but it's so well calibrated that you understand what she's doing. And yeah, I think like she's an incredible talent. I want to call out two people really quickly.
Sure.
One is I am thrilled to see them using more Bowen Yang. Every time they put him on screen, he is incredible. And the thing about him, of course, is that it would be easy to pigeonhole him into types. Very, very easy to do that. But as he proved in the Canadian talk show sketch, he can just play. He, in the Canadian talk show sketch, he just played a wacky anchor, and he got to do so much fun stuff. He had great chemistry with Kate McKinnon. It was all wonderful.
Mm-hmm.
He played a former lover of Issa Rae, which is not a sentence I never thought I'd say about Bowen Yang, but he was a great addition to that sketch. I was so glad to see him not just in 3 sketches, but pretty prominently in the lead of 3 sketches, at least one of them, and then definitely taking strong supporting roles in others. And it's just one of those things where I sincerely hope that they continue to recognize what they have in him and not just let him be not just let him be the center of great general sketches, but also let him do his own thing, because he's also a very, very funny person on his own. The other person I want to shout out is, and I have to look up his name because he's so new, but Andrew Dismukes.
Yeah.
I knew I was going to mess that up.
Okay.
And it's really just for he was pretty all over the sketch, all over the show. He did definitely have a lot of small roles. Like he plays the guy who delivers the COVID responses in the dancer sketch, and then but the thing that really stood out to me for some reason was he's the FedEx guy in the eBay sketch, and the way it's just like it's one of those like no small parts, only small actors kind of BS things, but he picks up a package and walks away with it. Like he just has this jaunty stuff. You can basically see him realizing in his brain, I have 5 seconds on screen to make an impression. I'm doing whatever the hell I can to make that work. And he did. Like I'm talking about him right now. And so well done, sir. And it's like the people who bring such energy to just like a waiter role or a very tiny part like that, like those are the ones I genuinely root for going forward. Like if you're willing to commit to that on that level to what another person would just half-ass, like you deserve to get greater work.
Yeah, I think he has big potential in the future, and I'm excited about him. Actually, that eBay sketch and the 5-hour empathy sketch were actually both cut from the Chris Rock episode. And,
really?
Yeah, so those were actually, I assume they were filmed preseason, and they were going to be put in whatever show was, had some extra time in it. I guess they could have probably fit the cut for time sketch in, but instead chose to put the 2 pre-tapes. And that is courtesy of our friends at the SNL Standby line. So thank you for letting me know about that. Those were interesting things. And I do want to say the one thing about Bowen is, Bowen, if for some reason you end up watching this, I'm a Montrealer. So I just want to say that even though you're arguing, I think on Twitter with the Montreal Gazette, or you said something about it, I just want to say to you, it was really funny, and it was so funny that it was so niche that I'm not sure how an American audience would find that so funny. But I would say for anyone who is watching SNL on Global, who is from Canada and knows Montrealers, or anyone, I guess, in the Northeast or has traveled to Montreal for Just for Laughs, I would like to say, Bowen, that was very funny, and I appreciate you doing that. So,
John, I wanted to,
yeah.
Since I found out you're from Montreal, do you guys really have weird bagels?
So there is this is a whole thing, but there is a big debate between Montreal bagels and New York bagels as to what are the best bagels. And everywhere my family has traveled throughout my lifetime, wherever we've gone to, whether it's down to Florida to see cousins or people in different parts of the States, they always say you got to bring down some bagels. So it's always been great to show off our city's pride as the Montreal bagels.
Right.
They do not look like the ones that were on it.
Okay.
That looked like that was a giant wide bagel. I don't know what that was, but Montreal bagels are great. So anyone who comes up here, whether you come for Just for Laughs or whatever you do, once the city opens up, definitely try them out. But Dennis, I'll ask you to move on from there. What about you? Any cast members standing out for you?
Well, everybody picked out. I mean, Heidi Gardner. I love Heidi Gardner. I've loved her since she came on. She seems more. I think Sammy, you said something about like she's almost too good. She seems more like a character actress in a sketch comedy show. Like she inhabits a role so intensely and so immediately that it can be a little jarring in a great way. It's just fantastic. I think she's great. And Bowen Yang, Liz, you absolutely right. I mean, Trade Daddy is hilarious, like an all-time hilarious. I don't say this very often, but he can come back as often as he likes as a recurring character. I'm fine. He hasn't come close to wearing out his welcome with me at all. But yeah, he's been used in a niche since he's been there, and this one he got to show a lot of range, which is very promising for his future. I saw somebody on Twitter said something like he's auditioning to be the new Keenan, which I'm not entirely sure I understand what that means, but I kind of do. Just sort of a guy who can do a lot of stuff, and he seems like he can anchor a sketch as the central kind of focus, being
I want a Bowen Yang talk show, a game show sketch. Really.
Oh my god, that would be absolutely great.
Yeah.
If we're just shouting out Bowen Yang sketches, I would be remiss not to say. I think it was last season when David Harbour hosted the Spin Class sketch. I mean, I think they did that again, maybe during the At Home episodes. Yeah. But I mean, I love that sketch. Like me and my girlfriend will watch that maybe once every couple months now. So I can't quote it right now, but he is great in that episode, in that sketch. And yeah, I would love to see more Bowen Yang. Going back to what Liz was saying about Andrew, with these featured cast members this season, for me, it wasn't until this episode with Andrew where I thought, who's that guy? This guy really pops for me. Like during the Jack Flat sketch, which I got to hear your guys' thoughts about. When I saw him, in that sketch, and I'm from Michigan, so all of that really played to me because of the whole governor angle. I thought he was great, and that was like the moment where I'm like, what's this guy's name again? Is it Andrew, or is it what is it? And I had to look it up, and I think that's like, for me now, there's like this moment where during the first couple episodes of a season where they add a new featured cast member. I feel like for me, there's always like that one moment where you're like, what's this guy done? Like, let me see like what his background is. And that was the moment for me with the Jack Flat sketch with Andrew. And I'm excited to see more of him this season.
Yeah. And the thing I loved about the Jack Flats one was when they went to standard definition, like when it cut out, because to me that was like, it really felt like I was watching an old episode of SNL for a second, because it felt like, ooh, where are they going to go with this? This might be a little bit dangerous, but also it's in like SD, and it was cool. I just thought like everything they thought out was smart about it.
And good use of Keenan in that sketch. That was like a very like, and kind of like what you're saying, Dennis, like Keenan, you can throw in anything. Like that's like the last sketch I was anticipating Keenan to be in, and he really killed it. Like so many of his lines, just his like weird smile, his funny voice. And also, John, I don't know if you would know this, but I did see that Tim Robinson, former cast member and current I Think You Should Leave, amazing comedic show. I saw that he was in the credits of this episode as like a writer. And I am curious if he was involved in that Jack Flat sketch, because he's from Detroit. It did seem like his humor was kind of all over that sketch. It felt like an I Think You Should Leave sketch. So I'm not sure if you've heard anything about that at all.
I don't have the answer to that. Typically, when you see former writers or former cast members in the credits, it's because you have a recurring sketch that appears from previous eras of the show that person who was involved in the sketch may not actually have been brought back to write the new one, but then they just want to credit that person. In this case, I can't see anything that was from the Tim Robinson era of the show, but if we find the answer to that, I'll tweet it out on the stats.
That was just something I saw on, I think, the Live from New York subreddit, and I'm like, that is so weird, because he was on the show for a year. I think he was a writer for another year, and then hasn't been back since.
Well, let me give out. So here's a couple things that I want to do as we're moving, further in our show, I want to talk about a couple of statistics that I thought were interesting, and then I want to talk a little bit about Weekend Update, and then talk about what's to come. So first off, one of the things that I know that people have started to follow and care about over the years is how many times somebody says "Live from New York." And, for somebody, for some of you who watched, since the beginning of the show, this started with Chevy Chase saying it every single time he was on, basically until he left the show as a cast member in season 2. And then, sometimes former presidents came to say it, or, they brought in some outsiders. But really, it was a very big deal to say this at the beginning of its run. And only one season of the show did they not actually say "Live from New York." So, basically for 45 years, they've been doing this. And this is it's a very big deal. So much so that it's amazing that Kate McKinnon has said "Live from New York" 59 times so far, which is the second most all time. And this is something that I've put out on Twitter, and it seems that a lot of people are interested in. We are 18 times away from her breaking the all-time record, or at least time, which is, it sounds like a lot. Now, the question is do we think that she's going to get there? Because this could be her last season. 18 times would mean she'd probably have to say it every single episode for the rest of the season. But there's a lot of people who come back, and I'm sure that Kate McKinnon is going to cameo in the future. But I think what we're looking at, because Daryl Hammond is not really, he's the number one, and he's not that involved in the show beyond being the voice of the credits at this point. We're potentially looking at her being the all-time leader in Live from New York's. And I thought this would be like the right panel to bring it up on, because this was a week where she said it. And I'm just curious if any of you have an opinion on it, what that means for a cast member, now to break that record. And the one thing I will say before I bring you in is that I do wonder if it's like a sports thing where it's like all the statistics in sports are completely inflated now because, more people do more things now, and different things improve. But I guess, Dennis, I'll ask you, since you've been watching from the beginning, what do you think about Kate McKinnon, heading towards that record?
I think anything Kate does is fine with me. There's not going to be an asterisk next to Kate McKinnon if she breaks the record. She's very deserving. It'd be tricky. I mean, she doesn't have, because the cold open is the cold open. It's gonna be more. You can have Carrie and Baldwin, and then if you've got a moderator, maybe they sneak in there, or if she's playing Kellyanne Conway or something like that.
And Alec, by the way, is 4th all time, which is very unusual for a non-cast member to do that.
He's kind of like a cast member these days. So
yeah,
I'd say it's a long shot, but don't bet against Kate McKinnon.
Yeah. So that's like one of those things that I definitely want to follow as these panels continue, and I'll update you guys. Obviously, you'll know as we move forward with that. But also, I mean, I guess if we're going to talk like music for a second, having Bieber and Chance the Rapper on, I mean, these are guys that actually Justin Bieber, I thought they would never bring back to SNL after he hosted, but these are guys that are like I mentioned about Jason Momoa last week. These are friends of the show, people that they love to have, people that they probably love to host and continue to host. Well, maybe not Bieber is going to host again, but at least Chance the Rapper, and people that they love to continue to bring back and have in different sketches. So I thought it was really cool, especially in that one sketch we had, which was a pre-tape. And this was something I was asking for last week, and I think Andy Hogland also mentioned, and I posted this clip out there. Give us more backstage stuff. This is the stuff that we want to see. We want to know the interaction between the cast members, and this is exciting for us to see, the Leslie Joan, Kyle Mooney stuff over the last few years. It was fun to see, a backstage sketch with Kyle and with Issa, and then Chance the Rapper walks in. I mean, to me, that was an absolute highlight of the episode. So I'm not sure if any of you have an opinion on that as well.
Well, it's funny you say that, John, because when I was listening to you guys talk about that last week, I was like, yes, 100%. Liz, kind of going back to what you were saying about the cut for time stuff not being the best stuff on the show. Like a lot of the times, this Kyle Mooney backstage sketches, I think, are the funniest stuff of that episode. And like, I feel like at least a quarter of them have been cut for time. I mean, one of my favorites was the new cast member sketch. I don't know if you guys remember that one where Kyle Mooney has like a fake nose and he's like Adam Zeekman, the new cast member. Mm-hmm. And there's this whole like SNL meta kind of backstage universe competition. But to me, I actually didn't love this one. I don't know what about it exactly. I don't want to say rub me the wrong way. The kind of cut to that funk jam thing. Is that a reference I'm not getting? Because
I think it's a Michael Jackson music video.
Okay, yeah. So yeah, that kind of just flew over my head a little bit. But yeah, I don't know. It definitely for me, it wasn't my favorites. I was happy to see it because anytime Kyle Mooney shows up and it's a pre-tape, I'm like, okay, there's gonna be something here. I do kind of wish they had, focused more on the angle of him, maybe throughout the week trying to like get close to Justin Bieber or something like that, kind of similar to the one that they did with Kanye a couple years back. But I was a little disappointed by that one. I'll say that.
I mean, I'll say to that sketch, like, I think that what's made the Kyle Mooney sketches work so well is that it's not just him doing what he's doing, it's that he's got a strong person to react off of. It's not that Issa Rae is not a great comedic foil, and you get glimpses of how good she could have been in that sketch, but the relationship just wasn't there. Like, there just wasn't a dynamic. And as a result, I felt the same way. Like, it was a sketch like, a Kyle Mooney a backstage sketch is usually one I really enjoy, but that one just kind of fell apart.
Yeah, I think what I did love though was that they finished that sketch and then it was Bieber's second performance and he's basically starting in his dressing room, so it's almost like it was a transition,
right,
from one to the next.
Yeah. I did like the button. Sorry to cut you off.
That's okay.
I was gonna say, I did though like the button at the end with the COVID stuff. I thought that was funny, and kind of having them in the future touch more on kind of the COVID kind of production aspect of things and some of these backstage sketches, I think would be a cool angle that they can do in the future. Except
that the problem with that button is that Kyle Mooney hadn't been in the show the whole up until that. Then they like, by the way, you have to leave because you have COVID. Then the next live sketch, he's in it. Like, if they just order, then it would at least work slightly better. But
that would have been very funny if they just didn't even put him in the goodnights after that.
It really committed to the bit. Like, but they I'm not going to tell SNL how to order their sketches. I know there's a million moving pieces that go into that.
To me, it seemed like when it went into the sort of big production number, it seemed like it was trying to go into kind of a more digital shorts, kind of Sandberg, Lonely Island kind of thing. And it didn't really commit to it. It just kind of came back. And like Liz was saying, I don't think Kyle and Issa make the comedy team of the century, or they just didn't have a lot of chemistry. So it seemed like it was half one thing, half another thing. And it didn't.
I mean, it's just basic sketch motivation. Like, they didn't have anything to really work with in that. I think it was a writing problem, not a chemistry problem.
Yeah, but I like that they're trying things. One of the things that I loved, and I'm not sure if you guys noticed, but it was the restaurant sketch where they had the X's coming in, and then after the sketch was over, they basically panned out from the sketch, and you could see the live audience on the the upstairs level. And this was something that they used to do in the 70s and 80s, was they would go from sketch to sketch and they would focus in on some audience members and maybe make a joke about an audience member and like put something on the lower third or something like that. And it's just like, I want SNL to remember that, everybody knows this is a live comedy show, and, use what you have to make it exciting and different. And, these are the types of things. I just thought that seeing, that transition in there, I was like, oh, that's cool. And then seeing the backstage, whether it was a good sketch or a bad sketch, you see all the former hosts' photos on the wall, like all signed and stuff like that. Being self-referential is key to a show that's been on for 45 years and something that makes people who've loved the show for 45 years continue to be excited about it, in my opinion, at least. So let's transition over to Weekend Update. I want to talk a little bit about that quickly, which is Michael Che. I mentioned this last week. We were talking about, Bill Burr and the danger that he brought to the show in a little bit by, pressing on issues that SNL wouldn't normally cover. And I said, SNL used to have cast members that would do this all the time, your Norm Macdonalds of the world. And we don't really have that many of those anymore because, a lot of people, I guess it's a different time in the world, social media and difference of opinions and stuff like that. But I think Che is the one guy that I watch on a weekly basis, and he's constantly saying things that you just like would never expect somebody to say on television, but I love that he does it. And I don't know, for me, like Dennis, I'm curious your opinion. I just feel like Che is so unique compared to the rest of the cast that it's like, when he first started, I didn't think that this guy could do Weekend Update, but I think he could have it on his own now. Like I love Colin, but I just think this guy is like, people will tune in just to see what Che is going to say on Weekend Update.
Yeah, I mean he's already well established as a stand-up, and he has a very strong voice, as a comedic voice going in that is almost kind of it's outsized for the role that he's in the sense that when he's I like Colin fine, but when the camera goes to Che, there is danger, but it's more just the sense that you're getting a real point of view. I think Jost is much more invested in sort of his persona and a performance aspect of it, whereas Che, you're getting more of an unfiltered kind of comic voice coming through, which can be very bracing. I generally think it's a good episode when Che stares down the camera and stares down the audience because they're shocked and they're not laughing, or they're gasping, or they're saying something. I mean, Che can be kind of a jerk, offline. He's got issues, but online. But that's part of the persona. He's gonna say stuff that is very, very pointed and very off kilter, and I don't know. It's exciting.
Okay. Yeah, I agree. Liz, any comment on Weekend Update or Che or Jost?
I'm a woman with an active Twitter account and an Instagram account. I don't want to lead either of those, so I don't have any opinion.
All right, Sammy, any opinion?
If you want to take my wish to not say anything about Michael Che as a comment on Michael Che, feel free to do
so. Okay, no problem.
I would urge people. Oh, sorry. Just sticking in-house with Geo Media. Just Google Jezebel and Michael Che. You'll catch up on some stuff.
Yeah, I mean, look, I'm not actually trying to be chicken-ish about it. I'm just saying, like, I have my opinions about him, and I feel that he has this platform now, and he's using it, and I enjoy it when he uses it for good.
Okay. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think we all feel the same way, like, for sure. And that's great. It's just I guess to kind of elaborate on what I was saying earlier, which is just that I like that he's doing something different on Saturday Night Live, and at least on the show. Whatever he does off the show, that's not part of the stats.
Oh, and I mean, it's not just what he does off the show; it's what he does on the show too.
Okay.
Look, he's doing what he's doing. He doesn't take criticism, and that's his thing. And he does it. And it is like you're saying; it does create an aura of danger. And I will say I'm glad that Weekend Update finally does feel like it has a voice. You don't necessarily always have to like what it says, but it does have a voice. And that was something that I thought was actually pretty missing from the early years of the Jost Che era. But now I think that they definitely have found their voice.
Yeah, and it's a very different voice than when we had Seth, and so I guess it's been a long time since we've had maybe this style of voice, and maybe that's what I find appealing is just the nostalgia of a different type of voice. But for sure, not everything is perfect, and obviously I agree with you. So Sammy, I don't know if you want to touch base on that.
Sure. No, I mean, for me, I know, Dennis, you're saying that Jost is kind of there, and for you it's maybe more of the Michael Che show, or Styling's Comedy Hour, however you say it. But I don't know, for me, like, what their Weekend Update does for me is that I think the chemistry between them and the kind of inside jokes that they have together is, for me, why it works. A lot of the times Jost is just there to kind of be this character of the very bland sort of almost waspy kind of news anchor, and then Shay is just there to just deflate him. And there are a couple moments in this episode where I think that really worked. There's the joke where, you know, Jost kind of puts on that deep voice, and he's like, "Oh, are you doing the voice version of blackface or something like that?" Like that, like really worked for me. The Ancestry.com joke, but you know, kind of circling back to Che and the audience, I wonder if it is kind of just with these episodes. I don't know if you guys have felt this way as well, but I feel like the audience has been a little just toned down or deflated in general, and I think it could just be going to the fact that the audience is supposedly at a smaller capacity. I mean, I think a lot of it has to do with the jokes and the humor as well, but I do sort of think that does make a difference. Not having just I mean, I've never actually, you know, been in the audience for the show, but I've toured on the NBC tour, the studio, and like they pack that audience with a bunch of people. And if you can't necessarily do that right now, I think there is going to be an impact in how, you know, if someone is not necessarily next to you, that's also laughing, maybe you're not going to laugh, whatever. But it is something that's interesting to me that Lauren, when he's been kind of interviewed the last couple of weeks promoting the season, has said, well, we weren't going to do another at-home episode because I need that audience. SNL doesn't work without the audience. I thought personally the second at-home episode was awesome. Like, I loved it. Like, and maybe it was because of the time where I watched it, where it was April and everything was depressing in the state of the world, and still kind of is. But you know, they tried that thing, I think, in the first at-home episode with Weekend Update, where they had the Zoom audience, where it was like, it was the weirdest, most bizarre thing. And sometimes over the last 3 episodes with Weekend Update especially, it's almost felt like a joke that I think is going to hit well. It has that Zoom audience almost, where it's like, you know, Shay looking at the camera is like, come on, what, you know, what, I guess that didn't work.
Well, you are right, Sammy, in terms of Weekend Update especially works off of the live audience. For those who haven't been at the show and don't know this, they do the Weekend Update, like the Weekend Update desk rolls in over home base. So that's where the monologue is done. That's where the host stands. And the people who are sitting on the floor, they're basically being performed to for Weekend Update. So they are looking, and they can, you know, there's, you know, big shiny lights in their eyes, but, you know, for the most part, they can get some type of feel of how the audience is doing. And when they're going, you know, joke after joke after joke, it does create a little bit of a vibe for them. And I think that if you were to ask Jost and Shay or any SNL, you know, anchor for news correspondent in the past, they would say that the live audience is key for a good Weekend Update segment. So right. That's definitely right. Okay, well, look, I think that tonight we covered a lot of different topics, a lot of different opinions. I'm so appreciative to have, you know, a variety of guests on the panel who, you know, share some opinions and also, you know, feel very differently about different stuff. But like I said, when I was talking to Dennis before, my hope was that, you know, we can discuss the show and find that the first 3 episodes were simply interesting. And what we have moving forward as we get into the Adele show and, you know, further episodes later on is that, you know, we take more risks and we continue to develop, whether it's, you know, pushing the boundaries on the election or different things like that. So I'm excited to see what's to come. I just want to go around the panel and ask everybody for, you know, give me one thing that you want to see in the Adele episode or the following episode that you haven't seen so far. So Liz, I'll start with you.
Well, on Saturday morning, I watched a screener of the finale, of the season finale of the Vow, and I put out to my Twitter followers, like, is SNL going to do a Vow sketch? Because it's been something that we were all talking about, and my concern about them doing it for the Issa Rae episode is that unless like you make the sketch about how there are no Black people in the cult, like there's no really good way to insert her into that, you know, potential for parody. And so I don't know why if that's why they didn't do one on Saturday night, but I am like I feel pretty good in predicting, or at least kind of curious to see a Vow sketch using Adele, because Adele looks an awful lot like the woman whose name I forget, but she played Aunt Beru in the Star Wars prequels. Like, I could see Adele pulling that off, and they're both British. It's easy. Like, so I hope Adele gets the same opportunities that all first timers do to really not just lean on their previous credentials, but actually try some stuff, take some risks. And we'll see what happens.
Yeah. Dennis, what about you?
With it getting, so close to the election, I think that doing something about Republicans jumping ship, or theoretically jumping ship from with Trump's polls sinking, I think that opens up a lot more room for, dare I say it, more kind of nuanced and insightful satire. Plus, it gives a lot more room. There are a lot of very impersonatable characters in the Senate and the House that a lot of people could do. As a Mainer myself, I think Cecily's Susan Collins is absolutely outstanding, and I would love to see, her who is clearly it seems about to lose her long-held seat in Maine, dealing with that. I think that would be timely.
Okay. Sammy, what about you?
Going back to 2016, I think an episode that a lot of people really appreciated that happened right after the election was the Dave Chappelle A Tribe Called Quest episode. He was the perfect person to, kind of, sit around the campfire and decompress about what just happened. And I am curious because, looking ahead, they're doing 5 episodes in a row, which takes us up to, I believe, October 31st, which is Halloween, which is right before the election. So, they've got to be doing an episode after the election, which would be 6 shows in a row, which I think is insane. But I guess they, had so much time off in the spring that, Lauren's like, we're just doing it. But I do think you need someone like a Dave Chappelle. I almost kind of hope it's Dave Chappelle. Like, I think that would be really interesting to kind of 4 years later, just kind of, hopefully closing the book on the whole thing. But, someone else I was thinking as far as hosts, Sasha Baron Cohen, he's never hosted. He can host for Borat or host as Borat for all I care. Like, I would just love to see him be a part of the show. And I think he is someone of that kind of caliber post-election that can kind of, make it something special. Because I think you need that. You can't, it can't just be anyone. And another person I thought was Jordan Peele, because he has a sketch background and, not enough directors host. I'm sure we don't want a lot of directors hosting, because who knows how good they'll be at sketch comedy. I actually did just watch the Quentin Tarantino episode on Peacock for the first time. That one that was interesting for sure.
And you should watch the Coppola episode as well.
I will. Yeah. But yeah, definitely we need someone that's a caliber special host for that post-election episode. That's what I'm hoping for.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think for your Sacha Baron Cohen point, I think if this was like 1979, like he would be appearing like on every episode basically, because he's like the Andy Kaufman of
totally.
So a lot of interesting stuff. I'm excited for Adele. For those who don't know, Adele has gone through some trials and tribulations over the last few years. I think she did have like a vocal surgery at one point, and she doesn't appear in sketch comedy very often. I think the last time she was in sketch comedy was with James Corden in Carpool Karaoke. So it's exciting to see her and see what she's going to do. She was actually the musical guest twice before. She was in a Josh Brolin episode on season 34. That was actually the episode, for those who remember, where Sarah Palin appeared on the show, and Mark Wahlberg came and yelled at Andy Samberg. So, that was like a classic episode. And then she was also in season 41 with Matthew McConaughey. She's also been played by Eddie Bryan a couple times. So she has some history with the show, and it will be exciting to see her. So thank you all for joining us. Before we head out tonight, I would like to just go around if anyone has anything to plug and talk about what they're up to outside of the panel. Liz, so anything going on at Collider?
Just keeping up with all the television. there's still some stuff going on, it turns out, even this era of shutdowns, including stuff like SNL. So we're keeping pretty busy over there.
Okay. Anything in specific?
Anything I can, no, I mean, trying to do anything exciting I'm working on. Like right now, I'm like getting ready to start waking up, staying up until midnight every week to watch The Mandalorian.
Yes.
I mean, yeah, I wish I had more exciting features I was working on. I should actually fix that. We're doing a lot of Halloween coverage, so I was brainstorming our funniest Halloween episodes list this afternoon. That'll be running next week sometime, and that'll be fun.
Okay, well, if anyone has any Halloween suggestions for Liz, where can they reach you?
You can find me on Twitter at Lizlet. That's Lizlet. And yeah, I have a website at lizshannonmiller.com and collider.com, baby.
Okay. And Dennis, what about you? So anything you got coming up, and where can people get a hold of you?
I'm on Twitter, Dennis Perkins 5. AV Club. I do shows. Right now it's just SNL. I do. I'm a lowly freelancer, so I just pick up work where I can find it. And for the last couple of years, I do a morning recap of a noteworthy late night talk show interview or comedy bit or piece. So I do one of those every morning if you feel like it. Cool. There's always a funny clip included, so nice way to start your day, probably.
Okay, well, everybody make sure to check that out. And then superfan Sammy, welcome to the SNL community and sharing your thoughts on everything. So where can people reach you?
You can find me making dumb jokes on Twitter at that Sammy Kay. That's THAT, and then my name, Sammy Kay.
Awesome. Well, I had a lot of fun tonight. I know that, every single week I mix up the panels, so I get, a variety of opinions, a different discussion. And I think this was really cool. So I was really happy to have the three of you on, and I hope everyone continues to check out all of our shows. If you've missed any of our previous shows, like I said, go to YouTube, search SNL Stats. They're all there and available for you. They usually show up on YouTube about Tuesday afternoons, so you can see them there, and you'll see this episode. And you can also find us on any podcatcher, search SNL Stats and subscribe. Make sure to let me know your feedback. I'm curious, what you guys think of the show. If there's anything you think we should improve, any guests you really like, any guests that didn't really do it for you, let me know. We're always interested in improving and making sure that the show is as exciting and fun for you as possible. If you want to see more stats or you want to see more discussion about certain topics, I want to know. So let me know. Thank you so much for joining us, everybody, and we will see you next week. Good night and have a pleasant week ahead. Thank you.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.